It started as an innocent game and Clarence House until Prince George opened the box. No one was supposed to touch. Inside weren't just jewels, they were fragments of a legacy erased: a sapphire choker, a heart-shaped locket, all once worn by Princess Diana. But how did they end up in Queen Camilla private quarters? What George found didn't just leave him in tears, it shattered royal silence and reignited a decades-old betrayal buried deep within palace walls. The innocent curiosity that started it all. It began on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and Clarence House, the private royal residence often used during school breaks. Prince George, now 12 years old, had been playing quietly in one of the lesser-used private suites, exploring old trunks and dusty bookshelves like any curious child might. The suite had been used by various royals since the 1950s, and those staff regularly cleaned it. Some older items had remained untouched for decades. One of those items, a golden jewelry box with a royal crown insignia, caught his attention. This box wasn't secured, nor was it clearly labeled. It looked oddly familiar, like something George had once seen in a painted portrait of Princess Diana hanging in Kensington Palace. He reached out hesitantly, fingers brushing the intricate floral engravings. The hinges creaked slightly as the lid lifted halfway. No alarm sounded, no voice stopped him. The staff on duty had assumed the room contained nothing of importance, and security protocols were light during off hours. George was expecting something fun, perhaps one of Queen Camilla's oversized brooches he remembered seeing at the 2022 state dinner at Buckingham Palace. But instead of modern pieces, he was greeted by a haunting collection of heirlooms that seemed frozen in time. The box was lined in deep violet velvet, and inside were ornate compartments holding sapphire jewelry, pearl pieces, and an envelope. He didn't know exactly what it meant, but something inside him tensed. The air shifted. He pulled one item gently into the light, a deep blue sapphire choker set in white gold. Then a pearl drop earring with a distinctive curve. Finally, a small heart-shaped locket. It was cool to the touch. He opened it, and inside was a lock of blonde hair, and a note that read simply, "To my boys, love, Mummy." At that moment, George's world changed. That was his grandmother, the late Princess Diana, whose memory had always been shared in stories, but never through something so personal. George's hands trembled as he placed the items back, heart pounding. This wasn't just jewelry. This was history, legacy, and loss. In that moment, Diana became more than just a name and bedtime stories or black and white photos. She became real, tangible, part of his blood. Still holding back tears, he rushed down the corridor, desperate to find his mother. What started as a quiet moment of curiosity and suddenly uncovered something that could shatter the illusion of peace inside Clarence House. A glimpse of his grandmother he never knew. When George reached the lower wing, Princess Catherine was reading near the drawing room fireplace. He stormed in, face pale, and hugged her tightly. She thought he'd scraped his knee or bumped his head, but he looked up, eyes wide, and whispered, "Camilla took Grandma's things." Confused, she knelt beside him and asked what he meant. George pulled the locket from his pocket. The note, still inside, the handwriting soft, cursive, slightly faded, was unmistakably Diana's. Catherine froze together. They returned to the room upstairs when Catherine opened the box herself and saw the 1985 White House Galas sapphire choker. She gasped. That piece had been considered missing for nearly 3 decades. Beside it were the pearl drop earrings Diana wore during her 1991 trip to Pakistan, and an emerald bracelet seen in her final public appearance in 1997. These weren't just artifacts, they were sacred pieces of memory. Catherine immediately recognized them from photo archives and personal anecdotes. William had shared some of these items were reportedly promised to William in the presence of the Spencer family shortly after Diana's tragic death on August 31, 1997. Others were said to be locked away at Thorpe House or Childhood Est, but this collection, so intimately assembled, was never disclosed in any family inventory. Catherine's fingers trembled as she sifted through them, spotting a brooch gifted to Diana on George's christening anniversary, and a bracelet she wore during her 1990 visit to India. Overwhelmed, Catherine sat down and placed her hand over her heart. The fact that these precious heirlooms had ended up in Camilla, his personal suite, felt like a betrayal, not just of Diana's memory, but of royal protocol, family dignity, and maternal legacy. For Catherine, who had worked tirelessly to honor Diana's influence in George and Charlotte's, bringing this discovery reopened emotional wounds. It wasn't just about jewels, it was about what had been quietly taken without consent. Still cradling the locket, George sat silently beside his mother, unsure whether he had done something wrong or something very right. Catherine whispered reassuring words, but her eyes couldn't hide the storm inside. She locked the box, placed it in her handbag, and called William. Within the hour, he arrived at Clarence House. This time it wasn't a formality, it was a family emergency, and as soon as he opened the box, his expression told them both that everything was about to change, and the emotional breakdown behind closed doors. William stood quietly over the open box, his eyes scanning each item like they were ghosts from another life. His jaw clenched when he saw the joker. He remembered holding it in 1998, shortly after it was pulled from Diana's wardrobe for cataloguing. He had asked the palace to keep it aside for his future wife. Now it sat among Camilla, his belongings, without a single record of transfer. He stared at the heart-shaped locket, whispering, "She wore this the day I turned 10. Catherine explained how George had discovered it, and how many of the pieces were never listed in official inheritance ledgers. William's hands shook. He called the Royal Archives office and demanded a full audit of all jewelry logged between 1997 and 2005, a period rife with confusion and transition after Diana's death and Charles's remarriage. William had always assumed the family treasures were safe, even if not always accessible. Now that faith had been shattered, meanwhile, Camilla was nowhere to be found. Her official calendar said she had taken 2 days of personal leave from royal duties and had traveled to Highgrove House. William saw that as more than coincidence. For the first time in years, William let his guard down in front of George, kneeling before his son and saying, "You were brave and you told the truth." George, still unsure, asked if Camilla would be angry. William replied softly, "This doesn't belong to her, it never did." The box was taken into royal custody that same night and placed in a secure vault inside Kensington Palace. William sent a private message to the Spencer family informing them of the discovery. Catherine spent the evening writing a personal note to Princess and asking for insight into how such a transfer could have happened unnoticed. For William and Catherine, this was no longer about royal tradition, it was about justice. Not just for them, but for Diana and the children who never got to meet her. Princess Anne breaks her silence. By the following morning, Princess Anne requested a private audience with Catherine at St. James's Palace, known for her stoicism, and rarely engaged in family drama unless it involved matters of duty or heritage. When she entered the room, she was already holding a 1946 leather ledger, the original inventory log for royal jewelry passed down through the Windsor line, updated until Diana's passing. "I thought you'd want to see what wasn't supposed to be missing," and said quietly, her tone measured. The ledger showed Diana's jewelry was meant to be split between William and Harry for a 1997 private agreement signed by the Queen and Charles. Specific pieces like the sapphire choker and the pearl drop earrings were highlighted for William's family, with the understanding they'd eventually be passed on to Catherine or Charlotte, and explained that after Diana's death several items mysteriously disappeared from royal storage. At the time, it was blamed on archival confusion during the transfer from Kensington to Clarence House, and voiced shock slightly as she revealed the unspoken truth. Camilla had quietly absorbed the last pieces into her private collection after her marriage to Charles in 2005, though she never publicly wore them. Insiders whispered that she viewed their possession as a symbol of finally stepping out from Diana's shadow, and admitted she had once confronted her bra there about it, but was told to let sleeping dogs lie now, with the discovery reigniting old wounds, and knew that silence was no longer an option. Catherine listened without interruption, tears brimming in her eyes. She asked in a single question, "Why didn't anyone speak up?" and placed a hand over hers and responded, "Because we were trying to protect the institution." But maybe that came at the cost of protecting Diana's legacy. For Catherine, the moment was a turning point. Not only had her suspicions been confirmed, but someone from within had finally acknowledged what many had long suspected, but never dared say aloud. With Princess and testimony, Catherine had more than just emotional validation. She had evidence, but while this revelation solidified her convictions, it also stirred something deeper, a sense of responsibility. It wasn't just about Diana anymore. It was about what was being quietly erased behind palace doors. Catherine knew she needed to act, not only for William and their children, but for every woman whose legacy had ever been rewritten by power, politics, or silence, and so she took the next step. Catherine confronted King Charles in private. Later that evening, Catherine requested a private meeting with King Charles III at Sandringham House, far from the public eye. She arrived unannounced, dressed in deep navy, her face composed, but her hands trembling. The king had been informed that she wished to speak on matters of personal and ancestral importance. Charles, visibly exhausted from recent health struggles and strained public perception, granted her 20 minutes. That conversation would last more than 2 hours. She opened her bag and gently placed the jewelry box on the desk before him. Charles recognized it instantly. His face went pale. Before he could speak, Catherine laid out the items one by one as she revealed the heart-shaped locket. Charles finally whispered out, "Was never meant to be seen again." Catherine locked eyes with him and asked, "Why did Camilla keep them?" Charles hesitated, then slowly he admitted, "I gave them to her in 2006. I didn't think it would matter after all these years." Confession shook Catherine to her core. Charles claimed he had tried to preserve Diana's memory in public, but in private he had allowed Camilla to take possession of artifacts meant for William and Harry. "They were just things," he said. Catherine's voice cracked when she replied, "They weren't things. They were." For the first time, the generational divide between duty and empathy stood naked in the room. And in that moment even Charles looked unsure of his own moral compass. Charles eventually agreed to have the items returned, but asked that the matter be kept quiet. Catherine refused. She believed Diana's memory deserved transparency. She told the king that the jewelry would not be buried in another vault or forgotten in another royal protocol. She wanted to give it to Charlotte one day, not as an ornament, but as proof that her grandmother was more than myth, that she lived, she loved, and she was not erased. Word of the confrontation began to leak through palace aides, and though the full details remain confidential, whispers reached even the youngest footman. Catherine hadn't just stood up to Camilla, she had looked Charles in the eye and defended Diana's dignity. The jewelry, once hidden in shadows, was now back where it belonged. But one question lingered over the halls of Buckingham. What else had been taken over the years, and by whom? Catherine was about to find out just how deep this went. Camilla, his reaction sparks palace chaos. When Queen Camilla returned from Highgrove House and learned what had happened in her absence, her fury was immediate. Aides described her as uncharacteristically rattled, storming into her private drawing room and demanding to know why her jewelry suite had been entered when told it had been. George, who discovered the box, she reportedly sneered, children shouldn't be allowed near royal property. That comment alone sent waves of outrage through staff loyal to William and Catherine. Camilla's initial defense was that the items were gifts from Charles, tokens of their decades-long relationship. She argued that since they were unofficially transferred, they weren't covered under Diana's legal estate. But when confronted with the Royal Archives inventory from 1997, which clearly listed the items as reserved for direct descendants, her case began to crumble. She then tried to claim she had always intended to return them to Charlotte when she came of age, a claim no one could corroborate. Palace sources say an emergency meeting was called in Balmoral, attended by Charles, Camilla, William and Princess Anne. William, emotionally controlled but visibly furious, stated plainly that the situation had caused irreversible harm both to family trust and to the monarchy's public image, and supported him, insisting that restoring Diane his legacy was long overdue. Catherine, for her part, remained calm, but "If it weren't for George's curiosity, we might never have known," she said. And that is the real tragedy. Camilla, feeling cornered, stormed out of the meeting and refused to attend public engagements for several days behind palace walls. Rumors circulated that her health was in a fragile state, though others whispered that it was her power, not her well-being, that was waning. The jewelry, now under royal protection at Kensington Palace, would never return to her possession. And for the first time since becoming Queen Consort, Camilla was facing a reckoning not from the press but from inside the family itself. Royal household in panic mode. As soon as the jewelry box incident reached the ears of the royal household's inner circle, panic set in. Clarence House aides scrambled to trace the box's chain of custody, only to discover gaping holes in the logging process dating back to 2019. That year, internal vault transfers were temporarily handled by a private security contractor, while the royal vault underwent renovation, a move that in hindsight created blind spots. Camilla's dressing room was flagged in the logs, but without precise contents. Listed the omission was minor on paper, yet monumental in implication. Camilla, his senior aide Margaret Gresham, hastily attempted to control the narrative by calling it a shared vault misunderstanding, but internal records suggested otherwise. Footage from July 14, 2020 showed the jewelry box being discreetly transported by a palace staffer under Camilla's direction. No official authorization had been filed with royal archivists. The absence of William or Catherine's signature on the transfer sheet raised red flags and prompted renewed questions about other undocumented movements of royal property. Behind the scenes, the palace PR machine worked overtime. A draft statement was written within 36 hours of the discovery, emphasizing cooperative inventory management and generational misunderstandings. However, Prince William refused to endorse the statement. He reportedly told aides, "This is not a clerical error, it's personal." His decision to remain silent publicly, but privately, marked a clear shift from the traditionally passive approach the royals often take during internal disputes. William's inner circle dubbed it his line in the sand moment. Gossip, however, is faster than protocol. By Tuesday morning, royal staff at Kensington Palace, Sandringham and Balmoral were already whispering about the box. The tale of young George's, Tess and Catherine's discovery was passed from aide to butler, becoming more vivid with each retelling. The gossip reached a fever pitch when it emerged that King Charles III had issued a direct order no one outside the family was to speak about the jewelry box again. That only intensified suspicion. What was so dangerous about one box of memories? While the palace worked overtime to manage public perception, the emotional fallout within the family became the real turning point for Prince George. It wasn't just about royal history. It was about human connection. What came next proved that Diana's legacy had been waiting for the right heart to unlock it. Prince George's connection to Diana deepens. In the days following the discovery, Catherine took it upon herself to guide George through his emotional turmoil. She brought out a collection of home videos, some shot in 1991, others from as far back as 1983, showing Princess Diana during her humanitarian work, from her vid to the minefields in Angola, to hugging AIDS patients in London. George saw his grandmother not as a myth but as a woman of courage and compassion. Catherine explained that Diana believed kindness wasn't optional, it was a royal responsibility. George began to ask deeper questions. He wanted to know how Diana helped people, and why she was loved by so many. Moved by his growing interest, William took him to the Diana Memorial Garden on July 22, which coincided with George's 12th birthday. As they stood beside the white roses, George clutched the heart-shaped locket and whispered, "I want to be like her." It was the first time William had seen his son connect so viscerally with a piece of family history. Inspired by that moment, George asked if he could donate the locket to someone who helps others like Grandma Diana did. William paused. While deeply touched, he explained the locket needed to remain with the family, but that didn't mean Diana's mission had to be locked away. George was then introduced to the Princess Diana Foundation and began planning a child-led charity initiative tied to mental health and education, mirroring Diana's causes for a boy once shielded from royal pressure. This was a defining pivot. Catherine later confided to Princess Anne that George had matured 5 years in 5 days. What began as a moment of innocent curiosity had turned into an awakening. William and Catherine jointly decided to give George access to select pieces of Diane letters and journals preserved since 1997 so that he could understand her values firsthand. It wasn't just about jewelry anymore. It was about reclaiming a legacy through action, compassion, and memory. Diana's spirit had returned not through spectacle but through a child's sincere desire to honor her truth. But even as the family found emotional clarity, a storm outside the palace walls was gaining speed. What had been confined to whispers in halls became headlines. For Camilla, the reckoning she'd long feared was no longer hypothetical. It was arriving faster than anyone expected. A public reckoning looms. For Camilla. Despite King Charles's directive to contain the situation, details inevitably leaked. An anonymous insider tipped off a senior royal correspondent from The Guardian, who published a discreet but telling piece titled "Lost in the Vaults: Diana's Legacy Resurfaces Within Hours." Hashtags like #Diana's Jewels Not Yours Camilla and #Justice for Diana began trending on X, formerly Twitter, in under 48 hours. Over 3 million posts condemned